If you've listened to any number of episodes of the Unlockables, then I'm sure you've heard me say that RPGs are my favorite genre of video games. As a medium for storytelling, they are unmatched in their ability to tell a compelling and emotional story that is capable of grabbing a player and endearing them to characters and themes for years to come. I began playing RPGs at a young age, and was first exposed to them through Super Mario RPG and Final Fantasy IX, both of which remain some of my favorite games to this day. Yet despite my professed love of the genre, I will admit that my experience with them has been somewhat limited. The two games I just mentioned were of course made by Square, the legendary developer of the Final Fantasy franchise. Square has largely defined the lens through which I view RPGs, and it's not a surprise to me or anybody listening as to why. Final Fantasy IX is arguably my favorite game of all time. Kingdom Hearts has infamously been a part of my long-running Guiding Keys series, and I profess my love for the franchise every chance I get. Aside from a few adventures into Western RPGs like Skyrim, Square Enix games have dominated the way I perceive all RPGs. So as soon as I started this podcast journey, I was determined to explore my favorite genre further, and due to some awesome collaboration opportunities with other shows, I've been expanding my RPG horizons. Now, it's easy to see how Square would dominate my thoughts. In the 90s and well into the 2000s, they were king. No one told stories or had a better visual presentation, and people were blown away by it. And it was all thanks to one game in particular, Final Fantasy VII. 7 took the world by storm and catapulted the once niche genre into the mainstream spotlight. Square's juggernaut captivated both old fans and newcomers with its, at the time, impressive 3D graphics, iconic characters, and emotional story. It would be fair to say that 7 sucked up all the air in the room, and during the latter half of the 90s, Square's Final Fantasy trilogy on the PS1 dominated the genre. So it made sense that during some of my most formative years, I would gravitate towards the series of games that were the best the genre had to offer. Why would I waste time trying other things when I could have the peak experience? Well, young Eric was dumb and thankfully would gain a little more common sense and appreciation for the medium of games as he grew up. As I started my own podcasts and found a community of individuals that talked about games across the entire spectrum, I began to learn more about some of the titles I had missed during my infatuation with Final Fantasy. Games that were talked about as some of the best RPGs ever made. I began to make a list of RPGs from gaming history that I had missed. One of those games is the subject of today's episode, none other than the legendary Konami RPG, Suikoden 2. I distinctly remember adding Suikoden 1 and 2 on my RPG list after searching RPGs I had missed and seeing these games on a number of top RPG lists. And with a name like Suikoden, how could you not be intrigued? It sat on my list for a few years, but luckily I would have an excuse to play it sooner rather than later thanks to King of Games 96, now playing on the free feed of the Retro Hangover podcast. Definitely go and take a listen to that as soon as you get a chance to. And so I had the opportunity to play it last year, and I absolutely enjoyed it. If you want to know how it fared in the King of Games, however, I, again, highly recommend going back to check out that episode. But this episode isn't about Suikoden 1, it's about its sequel, which is arguably more well-regarded and most likely the game many consider the best in the series. The only reason I haven't done an episode on the first Suikoden was because I was in the middle of King of Games last year, and my recording schedule in 2023 was pretty scattershot for a while. So I'll throw some of my thoughts about Suikoden 1 in with this episode as well. As noted earlier, the Suikoden series was created and developed by Konami. At this point, Konami had a pretty robust library of titles that included things like Castlevania, Contra, and Metal Gear, games for which they were very well known. New Konami employees Yoshitaka Murayama and Junko Kawano were originally tasked with creating an RPG to add to Konami's lineup, although this original idea was scrapped pretty early on. But Murayama and Kawano would revisit the idea a few years later after Konami tasked them to make either a baseball game, a racing game, or an RPG. In truth, none of those things were what Murayama really wanted to make. He really wanted to make a shooter, but that wasn't on the table, so he and Kawano decided to revive their scrapped RPG idea from a few years earlier, and thus, the idea for Suikoden was put into motion. Suikoden is based on the Chinese novel titled Water Margin, a highly influential classical work of Chinese literature whose name translated roughly into Japanese is Suikoden. The novel tells the story of 108 outlaws who gather together to rebel against the government. This aspect of the story would become foundational to the series, with each game featuring a cast of 108 stars of destiny that gather together to resist an oppressive governing force. Each game in the series revolves around this idea and features themes that center on political corruption and revolution. There are 5 core games in the series, being numbered 1 through 5, obviously, as well as a compilation of Suikoden 1 and 2, which was released on the PSP in 2006. There were also a number of spin-off titles, only 2 of which were released outside of Japan. The series has recently been dormant, although there has been a remaster that has been pushed back to an unknown release date, and a spiritual successor, Eiyuden Chronicles 100 Heroes, which was released in April of 2024. Eiyuden Chronicles was led by Suikoden series creators Yoshitaka Murayama and Junko Kawano. While Suikoden 1 is not the subject of this particular episode, it should be noted that it was critically received well and sold enough to greenlight not only a sequel, but a series that spanned 5 main games. As well as RPGs sold back then, this was before Final Fantasy VII, of course. It didn't break 1 million copies sold, but keep in mind gaming was not as big as it was today. So Suikoden 2 would release a few years later, debuting in Japan late in 1998 and in North America in 1999. The game would once again garner positive critical reception, but received a limited print run in the West due to disappointing sales of the initial shipments. Because of this, English copies of Suikoden 2 are highly sought after and prized by collectors, especially since the game's status has only increased as the years have gone by. And this is rare to see in video games, the fact that the opinion of Suikoden 2 has trended in an overwhelmingly positive direction as the decades have passed. It's considered by many publications as not only one of Konami's best games ever, but one of the best RPGs ever made. It routinely ranks in the top 10 to 20 of any greatest RPG. It routinely ranks in the top 10 to 20 of any greatest RPG lists you can find on the internet, and a YouTube search of Suikoden 2 will turn up a number of glowing retrospectives on how great this game is. But as was stated above, Suikoden didn't stick with audiences as well as it probably should have. We were in the middle of the Square Enix takeover. Final Fantasy VII dominated the conversation and the industry was changing. Suikoden 1 and 2 were sprite-based 2D RPGs in an industry that was transitioning to 3D. Games like Mario 64, 3D fighting games, Gran Turismo, and others were blowing the minds of critics and fans alike. So that's what really got a lot of the attention in the mainstream media. Sure, Suikoden was a great game, but it wasn't what people were looking for at the time. Final Fantasy VII had spoiled us, and we were ready for 3D games. That was the future. Suikoden looked more like the 16-bit RPGs from older systems. This wasn't a bad thing, but it wasn't what people wanted as they played more and more 3D games. If you're interested in the story of Suikoden 2, there will be moderate spoilers for events that take place in the game, so feel free to tune out now, maybe skip ahead a bit, or check out the timestamps in the episode description to skip ahead to gameplay. As mentioned earlier, there are certain elements that Suikoden games revolve around, mainly the themes of political unrest and corruption, and a small band of heroes rising up to fight it. These elements are 100% true of Suikoden 2. The story focuses around the conflict between the nation of Highland and the city-states of Joustin, driven primarily by one of the game's antagonists, Luca Blight, Prince of Highland. Luca is a chilling villain, bloodthirsty and ruthless. There are many scenes in the game that depict the horror he inflicts on his victims, where he murders innocent civilians in cold blood, right on screen. With the major threat of Luca Blight and Highland in the background, we transition to our main protagonists. Ryu and Jowie are best friends and soldiers in the youth brigade of the Highland Army, relaxing one night when their camp is apparently attacked by soldiers of the city-states. The two friends manage to escape and are temporarily separated, but we come to find out that the attack on the Highland Youth Brigade was actually a false flag attack, planned by Luca Blight to justify an invasion of the city-states. Jowie and Ryu flee the advancing Highland Army as they burn and pillage towns in their wake, eventually meeting up with Victor and Flick from Suikoden 1, who are working as mercenaries for the Joustin city-states. Seeing the evil of Highland, the two young heroes agree to work alongside Victor and Flick, but they are still no match for the advance of Highland. Eventually, they reunite with Ryu's older sister Nanami, who has also acted as a sister to Jowie from a young age, and our misfit gang continues to evade the relentless assault of the Highland Army. But it is in one town, devastated by Highland, that the destinies of Ryu and Jowie would begin to diverge. In the town that Jowie was rescued in, our two protagonists enter a cave and each claim half of one of the 27 true runes that exist in Suikoden's world. Ryu claims the Bright Shield rune, while Jowie claims the Black Sword rune. They hope with this power that they might be able to resist the might of Highland. But due to the destiny that surrounds the wielders of these two runes, they've just been set on different paths that would ultimately lead them to each seek different ways of ending the conflict and suffering that accompanies it. Skipping many smaller details that take place, Ryu and Jowie ultimately end up on opposite sides of the war. Jowie murders the leader of Muse, one of the city-states, and joins the Highland Army, deciding that it didn't matter what side he was on, he needed to end the war no matter the cost. As the player, Ryu refuses to join them, and along with help from Victor and Flick, ends up founding the Dunin Army. While Jowie rises through the ranks of Highland with his own agenda, Ryu and his mercenary army go about rallying the support of the remaining members of the city-states, as well as finding the 108 Stars of Destiny that, when brought together, have the power to change the world. I won't tell much more of the story or its conclusion because I think it's definitely worth experiencing, and it's full of emotional moments and surprising twists that make for a great game. But I will say that Suikoden 2 is fantastically paced and does a really great job of hitting the story themes which we've already highlighted. Politics is woven beautifully into an emotional, character-driven story. The city-states of Joustin realize they face an existential threat from Highland, but secret ambitions and egos from its member leaders make uniting to face it much more complicated. As Ryu and his friends build their mercenary force, they must also navigate the goals and personalities of the city-state leaders in order to gain their support for a common good. Suikoden 2 also leans into the distrust and prejudices that certain races of the city-states feel towards one another, as Ryu not only has to make allies politically, but convince races to set aside their differences to combat the threat of Highland. This tension visually manifests itself at key moments in the story, whether it's important battles or war room meetings. All of these themes tie into one of the most striking depictions of the tragedies and realities of war that I've ever seen, not only in an RPG, but in storytelling. While leaders bicker and Ryu's army struggles, we actively see the travesties committed by the Highland Army. Towns that we once visited become occupied, preventing us from revisiting them at certain points in the story. Some towns are straight up destroyed, wiped off the map in the wake of Luca Blight's fury. Oftentimes, we see scenes of violence happen in these towns as Luca kills indiscriminately. And you might think this just gets mentioned off-screen or in passing, but no, you actively see Luca cutting down innocent people as dead bodies litter the ground around him, pixelated sprays of blood dripping from his blade. Now, this is far from the first time we've seen the blood and violence of war depicted in video games, but something about the way Suikoden 2 presents it really drives the message home. You see the struggles of two sides locked in battle to determine the fate of two nations, and stuck in the middle are innocents who are just trying to go about their lives. You really feel the conflict as not all battles are guaranteed wins. Some are draws while others are losses, and the momentum shifts back and forth during major points in the story. It's a stark reminder of the horrors of war, the innocents stuck in the middle, and the sacrifices needed when fighting for your ideals in the face of impossible odds. And in the middle of all of it are Ryu and Jowie, two friends since birth that find themselves on different paths to peace because of the influences of the runes they carry. Ryu decides to resist Highland and Luca Blight despite impossible odds, concluding that this is the morally right thing to do. Jowie sides with Highland and begins an incredible rise to power, determining that Highland's domination of the entire continent is the only way to end suffering while working on his own plans to deal with Luca Blight. There are several times after these two part ways where they meet, and it's after a battle or on a secret path, and these moments are always charged with tension and emotion. Nanami begs the two friends to work together, while Jowie demands the outright surrender of Ryu and the Dunin army. I absolutely love friends turn enemies storylines in games. It really tends to bring out the best in both characters, as they have to choose staying true to their path or put aside their goals for the sake of friendship. It's really quite a story to see the friendship of Ryu and Jowie devolve to the point where they face each other on opposite sides. It's very clear that Jowie has no pleasure in what he's doing, but steels himself to do it anyways for what he perceives is the greater good. At the risk of spoiling any more of the story, I think I've set the table pretty well while leaving some exciting twists and surprises for you to enjoy. The story of Suikoden 2 is incredibly well paced, keeping the narrative moving while telling a great story combined with some great gameplay features. And speaking of those features, that's what we'll talk about next. In terms of RPG gameplay, Suikoden does most things well. When the game was released, RPG mechanics were pretty well established, and the first two entries in the Suikoden series, while not doing anything incredibly innovative, represent a culmination of the genre that was set to change with the coming of Final Fantasy X. In fact, Suikoden 2 is fairly similar to Suikoden 1 in terms of gameplay, making only minor adjustments. As we talked about during the history of the game, every Suikoden game revolves around the recruitment of the 108 Stars of Destiny. At certain points in Suikoden 2, you'll establish your own base of operations in a castle that you take over from a vampire, and it is here that you begin to grow your army. Now, if you thought the number 108 wasn't actually 108 characters, you would be mistaken. There are 108 distinct recruitable characters scattered throughout the world. Some of them will join your cause simply by asking. Others need certain conditions to be met in order for them to join, but all contribute to the growth of your castle and the war effort in meaningful ways. A lot of the characters can be active members in your party and brought with you into combat scenarios. Others run the different establishments located in the castle town, such as the blacksmith, armor vendor, rune vendor, hotel, or tavern. This makes your castle the most reliable spot to get new equipment, switch your party, rest to recover HP, and anything else you need to progress the story. Still, other members of the Stars of Destiny offer unique gameplay benefits. One lets you warp to any town you've been previously, another lets you run on the overworld map, and still another is a cartographer and provides you with a detailed map of the continent to help making navigating the world easier. Finding all 108 Stars of Destiny is incredibly rewarding, as you get to see the population of your castle town increase over time. You also gain access to some great characters who have unique runes that can be utilized in combat, which can make certain fights much easier. Gathering all 108 Stars of Destiny is also the only way to get the true ending. And if you happen to have a save file of Suikoden 1 where you found all 108 stars in that game, then you actually get a really cool in-game event that ties into the first game in a really meaningful way. It's an incredible example of mechanics like this that combine recruitment, base building, and rewards from the prior game in which you did the same thing. Speaking of the 108 Stars of Destiny, I mentioned how a lot of them can be active members in your party, and considering combat is a major part of this game's core gameplay, this gives you lots of options to build a party of 6. Well, Ryu plus 5, he has to stay with you at all times. And you can build them with characters who are your favorites. Combat takes place when there is story-driven fighting or random encounter on the overworld. But unlike the active time battle system that was popularized in Final Fantasy, you select actions for all of your party members before they do them. This can be anything from attack to defend to use items or use runes, which are this game's equivalent of magic. Once you put in all of the commands for your whole party, the round of battle will play out in order of who has the highest speed stat. There are runes and statuses that can affect this, but we're talking combat at a base level here. It's not overly complicated, and it's a pretty simple battle system compared to some of its contemporaries, but it works, and strategizing which runes to equip to which characters and where to position them in the party so that their attacks can hit is part of the fun. Now, you might be thinking if there are a decent chunk of the 108 stars that can be party members, it must be a pain to keep them all at a consistent level. And in any other RPG, you would be right. But Suikoden 1 and 2 are pretty progressive in this nature by eliminating the need for grinding. Any fighting you do in any area will usually give you enough XP to raise any party member you have to the area level within a few battles. In this way, you never have to worry about an underleveled character for long, as they'll be caught up to the rest of the party in a few short fights. This places a greater emphasis on equipment, runes, and party composition, and less importance on trying to level grind. It's a pretty modern RPG element that was present in an era where grinding was just an accepted reality of most RPGs. The one major improvement this sequel makes over its original is without a doubt the inventory system. In Suikoden 1, each character would have their own dedicated inventory system that has a limited number of spots, and items weren't split out between equipment and items, it was all in the same list. There was no dedicated party inventory system, meaning each character took items with them when leaving your party. This created some unique problems if a character carrying a key item was forced to leave your party and you had no way to get it back. There's an item in both games that allows you to teleport back to your base to make traversal easier, but because of Suikoden 1's inventory system, if a character had that item and temporarily became unavailable, you would be stuck without an easy means of transportation until you progress through the story more. It didn't make the game unplayable, but it was definitely inconvenient. Thankfully, the inventory system is vastly improved in the sequel, giving your party a shared inventory experience while separating out their own items and equipment. This one small fix made the experience of playing Suikoden 2 much more enjoyable, and shows that sequels don't have to reinvent the wheel to be impactful. Sometimes all it takes is minor quality of life adjustments to make a game better. There's a lot of other minor things present in the world of Suikoden 2, from a few character-driven side quests to minigames that involve cooking and climbing, and while I didn't engage with everything I possibly could have, I did find all 108 Stars of Destiny and completed the game in about 40 hours. So with everything combined, there is an incredibly dense RPG to be had, and one that is well-paced, featuring a fantastic story. Moving on to talking a bit about the presentation of Suikoden 2, we talked a bit about this time in gaming during the introduction of this episode, mentioning how the transition to 3D was happening before our very eyes. This is what the industry and critics were looking for, and if you look back at any kind of reviews or awards, this is what was winning. Games of the year, glowing review scores, 3D games were getting both, even if looking back, in some instances of 3D were better implemented than others. Suikoden 2 is very much a 2D sprite-based RPG that featured some 3D elements during its battles. This would have felt much more at home in previous generations during the 16-bit era, and may have been a factor into why the Suikoden series may have been overlooked at the time. Looking back during our modern age, where we get games that have fancy, cutting-edge AAA graphics and perfect pixel art graphics, we're able to evaluate the look and feel of Suikoden with less bias. Suikoden 2 is the 16-bit era of RPGs perfected. It doesn't do anything cutting edge or blow our minds with its graphics, but it shows a mastery of the elements that dominated the previous era of RPGs and gives them to us in a perfected package. The sprites in this game are gorgeous and are unique to some of the other sprite work in games at the time. Usually when making sprite work for games, artists would create a variety of models, a suite of character animations and presentations that would represent the various actions of the character they were representing on screen. This was usually used to save time during the development process, as devs would only have a limited number of movements and sprites to choose from. The sprites in Suikoden have a wide array of these presentations, and some of them are very unique, being only used a single time or a handful of times. The sprites in Suikoden have a wide array of these presentations, and some of them are very unique, being used only a single or handful of times. Victor has one sprite animation of him sitting hunched over a table, drinking from a mug, and it's incredibly detailed, as Victor lifts his cup, tips it to take a sip, sets it back down, and proceeds to hunch over once again. Usually, tiny little details like this would take time away from more important aspects of the game's design, but these detailed one-off sprite animations are incredible compared to most of Suikoden's contemporaries. It makes the static worlds of these kinds of RPGs feel a little more alive and immersive. Now, you might be thinking that because of such a large roster of potential characters, that a lot of them might end up looking or feeling samey, but this is definitely not the case. All of the 108 Stars of Destiny have unique artwork that make them stand out from one another, and this extends to both official artwork, portraits, and sprites. Since all the sprite work is wonderfully done, the sprites for the 108 recruitable characters are designed to stand out even among the fantastic NPC sprites. There's just a lot of detail in the characters that maybe wouldn't be present in other games, and I think this is a necessity as much as it is creativity and hard work. Because you have such a large roster of potential characters, not all of them get time in the spotlight of the story, so their character designs are sometimes the only thing that they can rely on to make them memorable or stand out. They don't often have fleshed out backstories or side quests where you get to learn a bit about them, so their design has to communicate their character where there is a lack of story. And the result is a game full of vibrant and unique individuals that all feel like they have a stake in the outcome of the conflict. Part of any presentation is the soundtrack, with RPGs having some of the best soundtracks in all of gaming, in my opinion. Miki Higashino and Kaiko Fukami craft a wonderful score that, after listening to it for a few hours, is instantly recognizable as Suikoden. And while I don't think the OST has any standout pieces, it's consistent and does its job well. Town themes are all unique, the overworld theme fits the world perfectly, and tense moments are underscored by songs that capture the mood and enhance the emotions you might be feeling. It perfectly complements every moment of gameplay, storytelling, and presentation, and not all soundtracks accomplish this. I don't quite think it ever reaches the heights of some of the legendary soundtracks in the genre, but it is something that I have and will listen to separately. Many games would kill to have a soundtrack that so wonderfully complements the gameplay, and the soundtrack for Suikoden 2 shines in this regard. Other than that, I don't have too much else to say about the presentation. Like I said before, this is an RPG that is built to be a distillation of the non-FF7 RPGs of this era. It doesn't do anything in particular to stand out, and it doesn't push the boundary of technology forward as much as other games in this era, but it doesn't have to. Everything I've talked about above makes Suikoden 2 a great game, and sometimes that's enough. If you've made it this far and you haven't played either of the PS1 Suikoden games and are wondering if I would recommend them to you, I would say yes. Both games are certainly worth your time, but Suikoden 2 does a lot of minor things that I think make it the superior experience. If you just want to play Suikoden 2, you could. The story takes place a couple years after the events of Suikoden 1, and although you might be missing some context during a couple of conversations, you wouldn't be completely lost. But if you're a person who plays video games to experience as much as possible, this is a must-play. Video game history is written by the victors. The games that are monumental titles get all of the attention, and during the late 90s, the games that were pushing the boundary of the industry are the ones that are still discussed as some of the greatest video games of all time. I'm talking the Mario 64s and Ocarina of Times of the world, and this includes Final Fantasy VII, which caused the Final Fantasy series to overshadow a lot of other games and catapulted its genre into the mainstream. These are the games that we venerate in our podcasts and YouTube videos, that we rant and rave about in multi-hour retrospectives. These are the games that are mile markers on the highway of video game history. But regardless of what popular shows or channels would have you believe, there are so many more games that released during this era that fly under the radar that just don't get talked about. Some of these games are very good and deserve to be discussed. Just because they may not have caused a monumental shift in the industry or been a highly anticipated title doesn't mean that they aren't good games or aren't a part of video game history. They are. Every single game that has ever come out is part of the rich tapestry and story that make up all video game history. It's just unfortunate that we allow certain portions of that tapestry to dominate the conversation. Underneath the shadow of marquee titles is a veritable treasure trove of games, their only sin not being important enough in the eyes of players and reviewers to be the subject of hours-long retrospectives and podcast episodes. In our landscape of hot takes and bold declarations, expectations for every video game release seem to be through the roof. We've been so spoiled in recent years by the large titles we have gotten that the bar of our expectations feels set incredibly high. We look for every game to come out and be a mind-blowing experience, to push the boundary of what games can do while they leave broken careers in their wake. Every game that gets a modicum of buzz or hype seems to have the expectation that it must move the needle of video games in some way, or that it has to make all the money to appease the shareholders whose only concern is how much money they can gain on their investments. Not every game can be one of the mile markers on the highway, and not every game should carry that expectation to redefine the genre or make all the money. But this seems to be the expectation for every game trailer. Watch any console showcase with the chat on, and you'll see a chat filled with obnoxious gamers screaming L or next game or where is X game if a game doesn't hype them out of their minds within the first 3 seconds of the trailer. So what does this ranting and rambling have to do with Suikoden? When Suikoden 1 and 2 came out, they appeared to be largely overlooked and dismissed. New RPG fans and the general video game audience were looking for something else. The critical reception wasn't bad, they reviewed just fine, but it wasn't what people were looking for at the time. The industry was transitioning, and we were starting to get a sense of what was coming with some of the standout titles of this era. Games like Suikoden and an avalanche of other games just got left behind. Now, I'm happy to report Suikoden 2 is one of the rare games whose reputation has grown over the years. As the years started to pass, some people have started looking past the juggernaut titles of the 90s at games that got overshadowed at the time, including Suikoden 2, and people quickly started to realize what I've basically laid out for you in this episode, that Suikoden 2 is a really good game. Since then, many publications have come out to name it as one of the best RPGs ever made on any number of top RPG lists. Any number of retrospectives on YouTube will make many of the same points that I have here as a testament to how good Suikoden 2 actually is. Like I said, it doesn't do anything groundbreaking, but it doesn't have to. In our quest to uncover every hot take and angle that could be said about all the biggest games, sometimes there are less defining games that are waiting for their turn just below the surface, and these games are just as well made as the bigger games that we all talk about. Suikoden 2 didn't stand out at release, but looking back, people are now starting to recognize the truth. Suikoden 2 is an outstanding game in its field. Sometimes it's enough to be nothing more than a really good game, and that is Suikoden 2's strongest legacy. Thank you everybody so much for listening. If you're interested in keeping the conversation going, you can go on over to linktr.ee/Unlockables podcast and find all the links to my social media there. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, join the community Discord, and let's have a conversation about Suikoden 2 or some of the games that maybe you felt like got left behind in the glorious transition to 3D. You can also now sign up for the newly relaunched Patreon. There is a $3 tier in which you get access to all the extra stuff that I do, including video vlogs, solo episodes, mini episodes, and you can vote in our community game of the month, which will be a featured episode the following month that game gets voted. So go check out all that stuff. Thank you guys so much again for listening. And remember, it's not just the story of video games, it is the story of you.